It's the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast, where we talk about all things consensual non-monogamy, polyamory, open relationships, swinging, and how you can have secure and sexy relationships, no matter how you do them. Now here's your hosts, Tara and Andre.
Hey, Andre.
Hey, Tara, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, great. Finally here. Glad to be here. Right? Yeah.
What people might not know is we had a little bit of a technical issue.
Yeah,
not surprising, really.
Running around like a couple of monkeys here, but it's all good now.
We're good now. So welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast. We are Tara and Andre, also known as TNA. So I'm Tara. I am a relationship and awesomeness coach.
And I'm Andre. I am a sex-positive psychotherapist.
And we are super passionate about supporting individuals and couples navigate consensual non-monogamy so they can have successful, secure, and sexy relationships. And this is one of the reasons we have this podcast and why we started doing this in the first place. And so I'm really excited about this episode and our very special guest, Ms. Ashley Robertson, who we'll bring on in just a second.
Yeah, she's fantastic. Very exciting too.
Yes, very excited. Yay. Okay, but first, an exciting announcement. So Black Friday is approaching at the time of this recording, and we know that many of you are excited about the special deals that are out there and what you're going to get, etc. And so once again, this year, we wanted to do a special offer out to our community and our listeners. And so maybe this year, you might want to spend a few of your Black Friday dollars on your relationships and feeling great in them. So starting now, we're going to start early with Black Friday, and in celebration also of Polyamory Day, which is November 23rd, we're inviting you to embark on a journey of self-discovery and relationship enrichment with our Poly Newbies digital course, which we are offering at an awesome price of $27. It's really a no-brainer, so even if you feel like you don't have time because it's the holidays, you have 6 months to do it. And we do recommend you do it right away because maybe it'll make those holidays even more special this year. We will post a link in the show notes. Today, drum roll, we are talking about how to talk to kids about non-monogamy, sex, kink, and other stuff.
Yeah, how to talk about it, when do we start introducing it, what kind of terminology we might use, a whole bunch of things. And Ashley is wonderful at, she's very insightful, but wonderful at being able to, well, here she is now. You'll see for yourself, she's wonderful at being able to invite that kind of dialogue. Hello and welcome.
Thank you so much, y'all. I am excited to have this conversation. We chatted so many years ago. And
I know.
Then I have worked with lots of families and had opportunities to speak with other collaborators. And I just feel like there's a never-ending need for parent education.
Yeah,
absolutely. It was back in July 2021. That's when we did our first talk. And that was before we had this formal podcast, and we were just doing trainings in our Let's Talk Polyamory group. But I know I've shared that training with so many people. And like, as you said, since then, you've talked to so many people. We've learned more. And we've had a lot of people recently asking us about how you talk about these things with kids and all the way to young adults. So we thought it was great to talk about it again. So yeah,
you're in your platform.
Yay. And we're going to share in the show notes as well some links on how you can get in touch with Ashley. But Ashley, a little introduction. So I saw on your bio that you call yourself a non-traditional relationship coach, which I love, and freelance sexuality educator. And so you were a former classroom teacher, and you have not one but 3 degrees. That's amazing. And what I also liked was that, and this makes sense to me knowing you now, is that you don't believe in a one-size-fits-all approach. And when you work with groups and individuals and kids and schools and stuff, you really customize and curate educational experiences that fit with those situations.
Yeah, I'm a rebel. It's just how it is. Everybody is like, box up that curriculum and just sell it. And I'm like, but it won't fit you because it's different. I'm a rebel. I got some tips though that will fit a lot of people. So take what you wish from this conversation, utilize something new. If it flops, utilize something else.
But yeah, I think that's well said, right? We are all individuals, but a lot of these things do run through. And as you say, some of them will speak to us more than others. But I'm so excited to hear about what you're going to share with us here.
I just wondered if there was anything else you wanted to share about yourself and how you got working in this area.
Sure, I'd love to. Background as a traditional elementary educator. And during that time, I had the opportunity to become trained in the Our Whole Lives curriculum through my Unitarian Universalist congregation. And they just basically needed sort of Sunday school teachers for this curriculum. And they were like, you have to actually be trained and it has to be done a certain way. And through that process and that experience, I learned a whole new way of relating to sexuality and the topics of sexuality, completely opposite from the way I grew up. And it was so empowering to be like, wait, I don't have to be at odds with my desire. I don't have to be at odds with my body. I can embrace the weirdness that is adolescence, but not have to think about it as like my body against me. These are topics and ideas that I've never heard of anywhere. How cool. And from pulling that little thread at that tapestry, everything else sort of started unraveling in all the most beautiful ways. Lots of hard work later, I have recognized that families would like this kind of support. And so I support individuals, groups, families, preschools, daycare centers, private schools in offering all sorts of different workshops based on whatever they're trying to do respectfully and positively for bodily autonomy. So that's what I do.
That's amazing. We were actually talking about this when we were preparing for this podcast about, what was shared with us when we were kids. And honestly, like nothing. I think I said last time, and I just told Andre the story again, is that like part of what I learned about sex was because like my friend Victoria Tracy showed me some stuff with Barbies. I was a teenager. Otherwise, I had no idea. Like, I think my mom covered the basics of my period and what to do and what if it spilled on your panties and all that stuff, but not really anything else. And so I wish I had an Ashley back then and have some openness.
That's such a great point, right? We get all the information, or maybe we don't, from certain sources. If we're lucky, our parents, maybe other kids. But I wonder, back in the day, was it as common that we might even talk about different ways of relating outside of the mechanics? Would we ever have conversations about, well, you could have something other than him and her forever and ever, right? The fairy princess and all that good stuff. So I wonder how those conversations might be changing today. What's coming up today?
Yeah. Our youth are really creative, and every time I get to work with an older group of youth, I feel so much hope for the future of humans.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, it's
cool.
really great.
And so today we're going to talk about how to talk to kids all the way to youth about non-monogamy, kink, intimacy, all those things. Also, there were some questions in our Let's Talk Polyamory community that people asked. So we're going to get to those as well, and what to share based on what's age appropriate and what not to say. So let's start with how to decide what to say.
Yeah. So I wanted to start by defining what a risk profile is for anyone that might be either vanilla or swingers or non-monogamous, but not kinky. The term risk profile might be new. So a risk profile is a thoughtful consideration of all the potential risks for any given thing, whether that's, skydiving, or whether that's telling a family member information about your relationships, or whether that's telling your kids about how vaccines work. Literally anything, there is a risk associated with it. And so when you consider, okay, if A, then potentially B, C, D, E, and of B, C, D, E, which one is most likely? When you're doing that mental exercise, that's the risk profile. You're considering, okay, these are all the potential risks. Then your personal risk profile is, I want to stay within low, medium, or high risk based on these different areas. So like maybe you would be low risk for financial risks, and maybe you'd be high risk for emotional risk, and maybe you'd be comfortable with a medium risk for physical risk. So you consider all of these potential things that could go wrong whenever you're sort of brains a potential issue, then you start to find patterns in where your comfort level lies, and you start making choices within the lane of low, middle, or high risk for each of those different categories. That's what a risk profile means. So the risk profile is very widespread when it comes to what to consider when we're thinking about specifically non-monogamy in our children. That's considering, how does this person that I'm dating feel in terms of trustworthiness or mental stability or the ability to understand when I say no and respect that when it comes to my kids. And there's so many layers there. So then you have to decide, like, is this feeling comfortable in my body? And then am I making choices that help me to stay in a space where the potential risks outweigh, or at least balanced, the potential rewards.
But then in terms of that risk profile, it can have impacts to you, especially if you are partnered or separated from a partner and that sort of thing. We were kind of talking about that a bit before. And you had shared there's some legal implications of a particular risk profile. And it may be why some people choose not to share things with kids.
Exactly. There is no right answer for this, depending on where you live, the political climate, your relationship with family, your dependence on financial ties with individuals, your job. All sorts of different factors can be considered when considering how much needs to be shared with kids.
Mm-hmm. But there was some good news, because you said that there has been some changes in terms of the legislation, in terms of how BDSM and kink are viewed, for example, in the DSM.
Yeah. So the bad news is that if the wrong person has opinions about your lifestyle and your choices, there are ways through the legal system to reduce your parenting time and your custody arrangements. So there's a very real risk of losing time and access to your child. But the positive is that the DSM-5 has recently removed BDSM as
a mental disorder.
And instead, there is a way for it to be disordered behavior if it gets in the way of your ability to parent and your ability to show up for your kids. But it is not in and of itself any longer a disorder. And clinicians have been pushing for that for a while, because so many people are actually served positively by their BDSM experiences, and they are a more well-rounded, happy human when they do those things ethically. So the positive side is that our mental health field has shifted a bit.
So we didn't mean in this conversation to start it off with, oh, you better be careful what you say. But I think it's also important to share this. And I know people think about this all the time, not just about what they share with kids, because the kids might say something to somebody else, but that may be the wrong person to hear that information, or might report it or do something with it, or it could be misinterpreted.
I did personally want to warn people to stop oversharing with their kids, because I'm seeing a lot of that in my work. I'm seeing that people are having a hard time kind of finding that line between friend and parent. People are kind of having trouble finding that line between what is supposed to be my mental load as the parent and the adult, and what is supposed to be the child's mental load as a minor. So there's a lot of oversharing that I am seeing. So reeling that back in and recognizing that there are actual risks associated with oversharing, I'm all for that message.
So it's really trying to find that sweet spot between having conversations, open dialogue, the attempt to normalize, but at the same time considering what the possible consequence might be, both in the practical sense and also emotionally for these young people that we're speaking to.
Excellent synopsis.
That's Andre. Brings it home every time. So awesome. I think sometimes, maybe because of discomfort too, as parents, we may overshare with kids and not really know what to say and when to say it.
I would love for people to consider the scaffolding method when they're trying to share something with kids. So if you think about how a scaffold is built, you have to build the bottom layer first, and then you have to build the next layer up until you can get all the way to the roof or to the top of the building. And so many parents jump to the top of the building, but they don't do the work of building that first and second layer. And so I want people to consider, like, what is the foundational knowledge that our kid needs to know have mastery of, really know well, even emotional knowledge, before I add these other layers that are going to shoot them to the top of the building too fast. Because what's going to happen then? They're going to fall. And we don't want that. We don't want our kids to fall. Falling would look like talking to a friend instead of talking to you. Falling would look like having a big emotional reaction instead of being able to seek refuge before blowing up. So many parents are jumping to the top when they're explaining something, whether it's sex or kink or open relationships or how the government works, like whatever it is, whatever hard thing, they're like, boom. And instead, that's an overshare because kids can't actually access that information. They can't make meaning of it. So we need to instead consider, what does my kid need at the foundational level? Mastery. So something that they really get, not it's the first time they've heard it. What do they need at the foundation? What do I have to share there multiple times before we can get to anything higher? And if we're consistently sharing accessible information that's down here at the foundational level and then building up to the next level, we're helping our kids get to a space where they have the ability to understand what's an open relationship, what is pleasure in a way that isn't just kissing, what is to be a consent-based individual that actually can take no for an answer. Like, what does it mean for the Electoral College to figure out who's president? We have to be able to start down here to then help them climb the scaffold. If we don't do that and we just hit them with how this hard thing works, they can't make meaning of it. Then they have a big emotional reaction, or they flight or freeze, or they just want to get out of the conversation as fast as they can to feel comfort away from you, which is not what we want. So they have this big reaction because you didn't help them climb the scaffold. So I say that a family that's oversharing is consistently putting their kids into that space where they're falling off those higher levels of scaffold without the base that they need to climb slowly.
And I would presume that the base would differ depending on the age. Your base is very different. The type of information you share is also different.
Absolutely.
Well, that's perhaps a great segue. Should we start at the youngest and see what's age appropriate for them?
Why don't we start with early childhood? So say someone who's the age 3 to 4. What sort of things might be the foundation for them, and what sorts of things should we be like focusing on?
Yes. So age 3 to 4-year-olds, these kids are mastering potty training. They should know bodily correct vocabulary for their anatomy parts. They should be able to identify trusted adults versus adults that are not trusted adults, so that if at any point they needed to report anything, they would know who they should discuss that with. And that's important in polyamory, because if we aren't making that distinction of like, this is my friend, and they don't know if that's a trusted adult or a not trusted adult, then they might be more susceptible to some of the assault situations that we see, because they don't think all of these friends are trusted adults when that might not actually be the case. So a 3 to 4-year-old needs that language in their life of whether or not that's a trusted adult or not a trusted adult. They need to have so much communication surrounding their emotions and their feelings. They should be reading all sorts of social emotional books where the characters are having big feelings and those feelings are being named. And then in real life, the adults around them should be saying their feelings a lot and modeling how to regulate when they're having those big feelings, because that is age 3 and 4 hardcore. It's all the feelings. And then in that age 3 to 4, we also want kids to have consistency. Consistency and reliability is what helps kids form secure attachment. And so if they know that the same adults are going to be picking them up from school, and the same adults are going to be sitting around their dinner table, and the same adults are going to be putting them to bed at night, that consistency is going to help them feel securely attached.
That's awesome. So in terms of what sorts of things you might explain to them, what level of detail would you get into in terms of like these friends that might be around, or romance or intimacy, or introducing new partners and that sort of thing?
I would suggest that these are friends and not trusted adults until they've been around your kid upwards of a year. Typically, I say that we aren't introducing new partners until we've been dating them away from a child for 6 to 12 months. So if they've been dating this person away from the family for 6 to 12 months, and then there is the introduction, that child should not see them as a trusted adult until they have been around the child for a year. That gives enough time for new relationship energy to wear off, for that person's true baseline to come through. And at that year mark, then we could start having that conversation with these young kids that says, this person has been a really close friend, and we've had a lot of dinners with them, and we've gone to a lot of parks with them. And what are your feelings about this person? Give space in that conversation for that kid to buy in, have a voice, feel heard, be heard. And then you could say, this is actually a really, really trusted friend at this point. This is a trusted adult. I think this person's going to be around a long time. They care about you and they really care about me.
And would this be the case for 3 to 4, or will that 6 months and then the year extend to other ages as well?
Yeah, that's the rule for all ages, in my opinion. Yeah. You don't introduce someone, in my opinion, for 6 months. And then that reduces the possibility that these people are going to just be coming in and out of kids' lives.
Okay, that's a good guide to start with. I think people get really enthusiastic, especially when they're in that new relationship energy. They're like, of course this is going to last forever. And so the tendency is like, I want them to meet the family and I want to bring this person in. But no relationship is simple. But I think sometimes non-monogamous relationships where there's multiple people involved have extra layers of complexity that are harder for kids, and it's also harder to navigate for adults.
And so let me just speak to one of those layers that's harder, which I feel like sometimes isn't talked about, and it's shared parenting. In that space, when you have multiple partners and kids, often the people don't know who has the final say or who is the one that's going to correct the child when they are doing something that needs correction. And so then all adults could be correcting that child at once, which is really hard on a child because kids don't want to make mistakes. They don't want to do it wrong. Or no one can, because no one knows what the chain of command is. So in that way, we want to actually reduce those potential issues by not having those extra people around until there's really space for conversation about how are we parenting this child. In those moments when the tickling gets too much and we really care about consent, if we aren't really able to have that conversation with a new partner, then they shouldn't be around the kids, right? We want there to be space and established communication rituals and routines so that those harder conversations can be broached.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we talked about this before we started recording, but it might be a good time to bring it in when you talked about these layers of trust and the idea of an onion. And I thought that was an interesting visual because we talk about these as well in terms of our boundaries with people.
The onion analogy is so perfect for the next age up, which is age 5 to 7. So the onion, that middle portion of the onion is super protected because it has so many other layers. And similarly, we want to protect our inner circle of trusted people. So our inner circle would be the people that we believe are going to cherish and raise our kids. That would be people that we're willing to, let them help our kids bathe. We're going to be willing to let them drive our children. We're going to be willing to let them, take them to doctor's appointments. We're going to be willing to let them maybe have overnights. Like these are the people that are in our inner circle. And so that's like the middle of the onion. And in our family, we call those the trusted circle. But then the next layer is no less important. We need to have all these wonderful people in our lives, just like an onion needs lots of layers. The next layer is going to be people that are friends, but we wouldn't want them to help kids have a bath. And we wouldn't want them to help kids necessarily understand how, practice driving a car. We wouldn't really want their car to be endangered in that process, right? They're friends, but they're not willing to take that kind of risk on. So that would be the next layer. And then there's more layers for different people. There's a layer of work acquaintances or church acquaintances. And then out on the very end is the part of the layer that we can rip off and throw away if it's kind of bumped and bruised. And that's strangers, people that we don't know. And so in that analogy, we can actually tell kids, like, it really doesn't matter that that person gave you a dirty look about your two moms kissing. Like, it doesn't matter. They are the part of the onion that we just crumple up and throw away. They are a stranger. Their opinion doesn't matter. And so in this analogy of the onion, you can explain to kids age 5 and up where people fall, so that this concept of friend can be a little more clear.
I know another thing that comes up when you do some reading on learning up with kids is this idea of the chosen family. And we had a bit of a conversation about that too. Like, I mean, it's an okay term. There's nothing bad about it. Like, being chosen is amazing, but there could be reasons why you might not want to use that term, chosen family.
Yeah. So Andre, what are some of the things that you choose that are kind of arbitrary?
Oh my God, what a great question. What do I choose? Well, I choose which tie I'm going to put on today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good choice. Nice yellow, nice pop. Yeah, so many of the choices that young kids make are completely arbitrary. And we, as loving adults, offer them lots of choice so that we have reduced power struggle. But the choices that we offer are mostly arbitrary. What kind of cereal do you want? What kind of cookie do you want? What kind of vegetable do you want on your plate? What color bubbles do you want in your bath? What pajamas are you going to wear? Like, completely arbitrary choices. And so the concept of a chosen family doesn't make sense to children, young children. Chosen is connected with arbitrary. Family is connected with super valuable. So those two things go together in this very confusing way for young kids. And so I don't love the term chosen family. I prefer trusted adults or inner circle.
Yeah, because one of the other things you were saying, which I thought resonated with me, is, can you unchoose somebody if they're in your family? And what happens? Like, can I, as the kid, add someone into our chosen family? You know what I mean? Like, how does that exactly work?
Right. And there's no real good way to answer that question. And so I prefer to go back to the layers of people in our lives. We delegate how much trust that they get based on how they behave, based on how consistent they are. And this is where you can list your values as a family. This is how we measure people. How do they show up? And do we appreciate the way that they show up? And if we don't, they can move out to the outer layers.
Okay. And so at this age, like, what would you say the foundational scaffolding would be for this layer?
For
Like
age
5
to 7, we want to be reading lots of books about what it means to be family. And we want to be providing, again, that stability and consistency, because, again, we're working on secure attachment. So this means not introducing people too quickly. This means focusing back on the child, like, with intentionality. So if we're experiencing NRE, we're having a great time with this new person, not getting caught up in that personally, because kids need us. 5 to 7 is an intense age where they are going off to public school for the first time often, or private school for the first time. They're going to kindergarten. They're being away from us for a much longer time often. The expectations have jumped from, like, oh, I used to play at preschool and daycare, to I have to read and add and subtract and take standardized tests. There is a lot of work that these little humans are doing. And so switching that attention and intentionally being on our kids when they are home during those home hours will create that secure attachment.
I love the fact that you brought up this phenomena of new relationship energy and how tempting it is, even if we're not wanting to get swept away by it. Sometimes we just are swept away by it, but how we have a conversation that heightens our awareness to the idea that, as tempting as it is, as delicious as it is, we also have to be very mindful of the idea that it could be experienced as well. All of a sudden, you have a new toy, and where does that leave me? For a little child, they could misinterpret that we are able still to love them while loving the other at the same time, right? So we want to be able to really have that awareness of that. It's a great point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this may apply to various ages, but what happens when, even if we do that 6 months and then 1 year thing, and we do introduce someone, how do we position it to young kids if those people are no longer part of their lives? Because I'm I know that it's a hard transition, right? How you transition people out of your life who were trusted adults.
Yes. So some of the things we need to prepare for when a de-escalation happens or a breakup happens is the reality that that person's name is going to be coming up a lot from our children, and that just simply the name can be unsettling to us and cause us reactions that then make the child the problem. So
Right.
another way to say this would be, we aren't at odds with our children. They are not a danger to us, but our brain perceives those as dangers. So being aware that, like, okay, the first step is going to be recognizing that when my amygdala is fired up because I heard their name out of my little sweet baby's mouth, my sweet baby is not the enemy. And just repeating that so that we can be aware that our body is going to have that reaction and that we cannot treat our baby as if they are the predator coming after us. So that's the first step, is like, know that that's going to happen. That's a natural reaction, and have a plan. So whatever you want to make that plan, it can be all sorts of things, but have a plan. So whenever that kid brings up that person's name or story or a question, where are they? What's happening? I miss when they did this, whatever. Have a plan. So one of my plans has always been to immediately say, I'm so thankful for the time that person was in my life. And it just becomes a knee-jerk reaction. I chose those words. And so every time my kid says the name, I say, I'm so thankful for the time they were in my life. And I always follow it with a positive memory. And so in that way, the kid doesn't think they did anything bad by bringing up that name.
I think that strategy would actually apply to a lot of situations, not just kids, in terms of like having, being aware of your reaction to something and having a plan around it.
I love to frame it in the positive, and I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but I wonder about those relationships that unfortunately might go south, and we find out that the person was not so wonderful. How did that, I'm glad we knew them.
Yeah, so I had one of those, and the way that I described what happened to my kids, and of course you have to do this lots of times. That's the reality of grieving. So prepare yourself. Like, can't be mad when your kid has asked you the 12th time why so-and-so isn't around anymore. Like, that's what our brain is supposed to do to grow out of its space of like depressed, upset. Like, that's what we have to do. We have to keep processing it and have safety to keep processing it. So the words that I said was that they used to be a trusted adult and they showed me behavior that showed me that they no longer can be a trusted adult. My job is to keep you healthy and safe as a parent. My job is to keep you healthy and safe. And them being around was no longer safe. That's it. And we believe people when they show us who they are.
That's awesome. I love that. Taking notes, people. That's a good one. That was 5 to 7. Shall we move on to 8 to 12? So like older children, in terms of like, what's the circuits for this age and how do we explain things to them?
So 8 to 12 is prime puberty. And when we're thinking about puberty, as the parents in charge of charting the path towards body positivity or even body neutrality, we want to know what to expect. So the first thing we need to know about how our kids' bodies and brains work during this time period is that their emotions are kind of an on or off switch because of their hormones. So like, if the hormone train is turned on, the switch is on. And it's not like metered on and off. It's not a dimmer switch. It's on or off. The dimmer switch doesn't get installed till later. So if you're getting dramatic, big emotional responses to information, new information, same information, that's their body. Like, a lot of it is their body. It's not always your delivery. It's not always that you did something wrong. This is prime puberty basics. And so to be able to sort of plan for that and expect that sometimes helps us take things less personally when they don't go so well. It's also important to know that the goal is not for things to be addressed once, ever, ever. That's not how our brains learn anything, literally anything. I mean, how many times have you been CPR certified and they just keep making you do it? Like, there's a reason for that. So we need to see all of the conversations we're going to be having with our kids about all the things: sex, kink, non-monogamy, how to use a condom, how to use a tampon, like when they should ask for help. Like, all the things need to be on repeat, and all those conversations need to be so short. I mean, if they're 8 minutes or less. If they're 5 minutes or less.
Okay.
10 minutes or less. Like, it has to be short. And they should do most of the talking. So that means that in this age bracket, 8 to 12, your job is to shut up most of the conversation.
Okay.
That is so hard for parents because they're like, oh, they asked, this is my opening. Dun, 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 the show. And then those kids don't even want to make it to intermission. Instead, we want to see those openings as reels. You get 6 seconds. And then you want that kid to process with you after you've shared your reel. Not a show, a reel. Really short. Really, really short. So you can share something very short, and then you can ask a question. So maybe your kid is like, hey, I saw you kissing out front when your friend left, and that freaked me out. In that opener situation, we need to say, oh, I'm surprised. I meant to not confuse you that way. I'm really sorry that I confused you. Like, go for their experience of whatever it was that's happened, right? Don't defend yourself. Go for, oh, I'm really sorry. Like, I would have been really shocked and surprised if that happened to me. I really broke your trust in that moment, and I didn't explain it ahead of time. I'm really sorry. Like, thank you for telling me that happened. Wow. What do you need? And then you pause. Right? So we're not explaining all of non-monogamy. We're not explaining who that person. We're not defending. No, because your kid brought something up about them being hurt, being surprised, being scared, being worried. Okay. It's about them and their feelings. So then you create space for them to say what they need. And the majority of that conversation then becomes them sharing. What was it like? What were they feeling? What do they need? What do they want? What kind of information? And again, you're responsible for the clock. If that kid is 8 and they saw you kissing someone, you're responsible for saying, I think we've talked about this long enough that now we need a little bit of space so that you can think through it a little bit more. And I don't want to overload you with lots of information. So I'm going to end the conversation here, and I'm going to be responsible to check back in with you because I care about you being supported through this new information. And then you bring it up. Never when you're looking straight at your kid. Never at the dinner table when you're looking straight at your kid. Never. You want to be doing that side by side or when they're in the back of the car, so that there is a clear, distinct end to that conversation of you're going to arrive at the place and get out of the car and that conversation is done. So everyone subconsciously knows there's a time limit on this thing. Or you're both unloading the dishwasher and all of your focus is on getting all those dishes out and put away. And as soon as that task is done, you know that conversation is going to be done. So subconsciously, we can all feel safer about that ending.
I was thinking about the overload, and I think, parents say, this is my opening, but I think they also say, this is my opening. I'm so scared about sharing this information. I'm just going to dump everything. Fuck the scaffold. I'm just going to dump it because they want to get it off and they don't want to have the conversation again. So that's kind of like the other side of it. I think that sometimes happens to people.
Yeah. And so that analogy that I like to share is that your kid is at a buffet, and instead of you helping them try like one bite of each of those weird new foods, you just pile their plate and expect that they eat it all. And no one likes to leave that buffet feeling sick. No one likes that. Feeling overwhelmed. They don't want to come back to that restaurant ever again. And that's not what we want. We want our kids to be like, oh, that weird green Jell-O stuff, I never would have eaten that before, but kind of want to try another bite. I'm going to go back to the buffet and see if I can find that weird green Jello stuff.
I
Don't
often
make them fill their plate and eat it all.
And I think that's true of adults too in relationships, especially when people are navigating non-monogamy. I was laughing when you said about not across the table. I think the same is sometimes true of adults, like go on a walk. You don't have to look at the person. You can have a conversation and not feel like you have to look at them. And that if you look away, that it might mean something, that sort of thing. So if they haven't experienced something and you want to actually just bring it up, how would you approach that?
So my favorite way to bring it up is this age group, 8 to 12. And it's with the book Penny and the Plain Piece of Paper. And in that book, a little scribbled character travels through different types of print. And she's bored because she was on a plain piece of paper and wants adventure, wants to try something new. And so she goes to all these different kinds of print and learns that each one has a different set of rules. So the newspaper has to be about real information. And if she's pretend, she can't be there. The graph paper, all of the objects have to fit in the shape of whatever shape is drawn on graph paper. And since she's like a crazy scribble and she's not a geometric shape, then she can't be there. And so she goes through all of these different types of print and she's feeling constrained by all of these different sets of rules. So at the end, she creates her own set of rules and she creates this beautiful space on her plain piece of paper. It's my favorite way to open the conversation with this age group of age 8 to 12 because they understand how rules work. They've been in school long enough to understand there's a code switch from their classroom teacher to their specials teacher, from the art teacher to the all school convocation. And there's all these different rule sets based on who is in charge at that different place. They understand that there's a different way to behave at a restaurant than at a grocery store. They understand that there's a different way to behave at grandma's house than at home. And they love the reality of a plan, rules, what to expect. So in this space, kids are very much thinking, where do I fit? Like, what do I feel good about? And so you can relate to them that the rules of marriage, monogamous marriage, don't feel good to you. And so you have decided that you're going to create your own set of rules and that everyone involved knows the set of rules. And so it's ethical and it's consent based and everyone understands that we're going for happiness. And that book helps give kids the scaffold that they need to get to that conversation.
Is this also the age where you would talk a bit more about a consent, or though I think the consent would probably start a little bit earlier, but the amount of information maybe is different?
Absolutely. Consent should start as early as diaper changes, where you're asking the baby, you say to the baby, like, we're going to change your diaper now. And then you pause and then you start the diaper change so that they can understand what's happening to their body instead of just like maneuvering like a doll. So that should be going all the way through. And yes, 8 to 12 is very much when we're saying consent is more than just yes or no. We have to talk about body language and nonverbal communication and all the other layers. Enthusiasm.
And this, because a lot of stuff is changing too at this time, right? So they're obviously needing to have all those conversations as well.
8 to 12 is awesome.
Is that what ages your kids are?
That, yeah, right there.
That right there. Okay. Yep. So this is like your field of genius right now.
It is so much fun.
Well, you get to witness all that we're saying firsthand. It's wonderful.
Absolutely. The other day, I had some stuff dropped off at my house for a kinky party that I was throwing. And I was just so thankful that I have spoken to my kids as if they are capable to understand all of this. And that I have had a relationship with them where they know stuff about mom, but they don't want to ask questions. And so they're smart enough not to ask the dumb questions because I pause and I will say, do you want to know that information before I answer? And 50% of the time they're like, nope, actually I don't. anyway, I love that that's the reality of our relationship, because when all this stuff was being dropped off at my house, I told the kids, I need you not to go in the garage this afternoon. There's some stuff out there that is for adults and you don't need to see it. And they were like, okay, cool. That was it. They understand that there's this line between what a kid should know and what a kid shouldn't know. And it's okay for me to say, like, I'm a whole human and I do this thing that is for adults. It's not for you. So pretty great.
I wonder if I would have heard that, being the type of kid or person that I am, if it would have been my biggest invitation, I'd head straight to the garage.
Yeah. Well, that's coupled with a lot of discussions saying that it's my job to keep you healthy and safe, and I have to protect you from certain information because some people think you shouldn't know certain things. And so I am not going to share or allow you to know certain things for your protection. And so if I can say that and they understand, the implication here is very real. If you were to say the wrong thing to someone who isn't in our circle of understanding, and they know what that means at this age, they're like, oh, these are the qualities about this person. I can name it off right now. They don't like gay people. They don't believe people should have babies outside of male-female relationships. Like, my children can rattle it off. And they're like, that's what makes them a safe adult. And I'm like, those people have power. And those people with the wrong information could do bad things. And so I'm going to protect you by not giving you some information so that you don't get put in that position.
You know, it's interesting as we listen to this, it makes me think about the dangers of what you might have ordered being in the garage and how they could harm us in some way, unfortunately. And yet I wonder to what extent, if we had ammunition in there, if we had guns in there, would we be talking about this to this extent, all of not only the physical consequence potentially, but what about all the emotional implications? And, you know, do we really speak and inform them in the same way, the same invitation? I don't know. I'm not a gun owner and I don't have kids with guns, but I wonder how, and if those conversations are being, not kids with guns, but you follow what I'm saying.
That's why I was laughing. Kids with guns. What?
Well, you know, that's perhaps another segue if you're willing. So we might then say to kids, well, you see me with a rifle and I show you the dangers of it, and there's nothing wrong with a firearm. We have great potential in it, but we also have respect for it, and there's a time and a place for this, and I might even take you out in the field or to the range and let you fire off a couple of shots, and you might even have your own expression of it at a very young age, a reasonably young age. What about when children might come and say, well, you know, I'm also wanting to have more than one friend. I also feel that this way of relating would be a perfectly fantastic thing for me as well. How do we come to recognize that and invite that kind of dialogue as parents? Because, you know, we have this, I guess, this responsibility, this privilege to say, well, I want to introduce it to them and I want to show them what's going on my side. But these little creatures also have their own drives and desires and curiosities as well.
Absolutely. So that would lead us to the next age bracket, which is like 13 to 17, where kids are fully into the work of exploring relationships, how relationships work, how friendships work, how social currency works. And that is the space where we have to talk about risk with our kids very actively. We need to give them opportunities to think through, what are the risks associated with you doing X? Whether that's sharing their address with some person that they're gaming online with, whether that's going to prom with 2 dates instead of 1, whether that's being alone in someone's house when the parents are out of town. There's so many things that we need to have very open lines of communication where we're actively asking our kids to consider risk, because we don't want them to be afraid. We don't want them to be anxious, but we also don't want them to be naive. And it takes practice to be a critical thinker when it comes to all things. I mean, that's why we're, you know, requiring kids to start comprehension practice from like the time that they start school all the way through. That never stops. We never stop asking kids comprehension questions. It's the same with critical thinking. We have to give them practice for critical thinking, which means critical thinking surrounding their bodily safety and the way that their choices have reactions. So absolutely, yes. If you're considering that you would want to be non-monogamous and you're 15, let's talk about the risks associated with that. What are the safe spaces where you can have that be like expressed, and where are the spaces where that really should not be expressed because of safety reasons?
Because this is also the age where kids are really exploring their sexuality too. So there's those conversations that have to happen as well.
Yeah. And being an askable adult means that you shut up a lot. A lot.
I love that.
It means that you create a safe space for your kid to info dump and your kid to be an external processor, and that you are the person asking some hard questions and also complimenting the hell out of their brain and the way that they think and the way that they are curious. And a lot of your own opinions are not invited to that conversation.
So how do you open up those conversations with them? Do you have some examples? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
This is the perfect age for the skipping stone strategy, ages 13 to 17. The skipping stone strategy means that you're not asking any direct questions. So you imagine that you have a stone in your hand, that you're going to toss it onto the lake, and the toss is a benign wonderment. So you would say something like, I wonder what it feels like to stumble onto porn online. Your kid has in no way been asked a direct question, so there is safety to exit that conversation. They can exit by being like, gross, that's an exit. That stone sunk. It did not skip. They can exit by saying, I do not want to talk about that with you. That stone sunk, right? It did not skip. However, if in that moment they were to say, it's really unsettling and it's happened a lot, and I'm shocked at how big the penises are. You know, like if they were to say anything, you get a skip. And that is your child buying into a conversation. So you start with a benign wonderment. There should be no goal in you sharing anything. The only goal is, I want to share something I think about that I think my child might be experiencing, so that they know I get it.
Okay.
That's it. That's it. Just so that they know I'm not a detached, useless adult in their life. I get it. So you share a benign wonderment. I wonder what it feels like to notice your parent has a dating app on their phone.
Okay. I was going to ask you about that specifically, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because that kid probably thinks that their parents are monogamous, right? And if your I wonder isn't about you. It's just like, I wonder what it's like to bump into a dating app on your parents' phone when they're married. Mm-hmm. You know, you don't have to share. It's not about you. You're just offering this idea into your kid's head as like, this is our reality in some people's lives. And then if it skips into, oh my God, I would be mortified. I would think my dad's cheating. I would blah, blah, blah. You know, like you get a bunch of skips, then you in that space get to then ask another question. Right? We're not trying to share our opinions until there is definite buy-in and consent for a back and forth conversation. So you could say, like, what would you do? Right? Well, what would you do if that was something you bumped into? And that's them practicing critical thinking. So then they can be like, oh, I tell mom right away. And then at some point, if there is opening for this, you could say, well, I have some different opinions about how that might go or how that might feel, just because I've lived long enough and I have friends who do things. So if you ever want to talk about it, I have some different opinions. And maybe in that moment, your kid is like, I want to know, like right then. But maybe your kid doesn't feel that way. Maybe your kid is like, I did not want to know, right? So you create space for both of those reactions to be okay, instead of the expectation that your child buy in and have the back and forth volley of a required conversation. It reduces power struggles.
Okay. So no requirement. It's more sort of warming them up with a musing or a thought that's not directly related to you. It might be somewhat that in that case, that might be related to something that would be you, because you might have a dating app on your phone, or you might be meeting new friends. They might, you know, get introduced to every once in a while, that sort of thing.
Yeah. There are so many of those potential openers that.
Okay. Well, that was awesome. So why don't we go ahead to like older kids? Because sometimes people, by the time they get to a certain age, like 18 and over, people are like, oh, I don't have to talk to them anymore. They know all the things, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's still an important time to share things, especially if you're wanting to be authentic adult and not be lying. Because I think that's another thing we don't want to do to our kids is lie.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Like, what are the feelings when we think someone's lying to us?
Yeah, and I think at that age too, well, even earlier ages, kids are pretty smart. They would know if we are lying or pretending or that sort of thing. So what sorts of things would you want to focus on if your kids are older?
So an 18-year-old is an adult, which means that in some places they could actually show up in the same spaces as you, which is a reality that needs to be said. It also means that your kids are autonomous humans and you get to be invited in their life or not. So entitlement needs to be checked at the door. All of this rhetoric surrounding respect for all the work I did needs to be checked at the door. You get the opportunity to reinvent your entire relationship with your kid when they turn 18 into a buy-in to their life. Like, it's completely different. So some understanding about that reality first of like, okay, I either get to be invited or rejected by my own child over and over again means I need to learn about how I do a thing and how it's received if I want a continued relationship with this kid. So let's start there. And that's hard. That's hard. And the rejection from your own child is like extra hard, right? Like, oof. So if you're in that space and you're not able to manage the rhetoric surrounding entitlement and, respect, get therapy, because that's like the best plan for how you manage your future with this human. It could be family systems therapy or it could be individual, but that's step one in my opinion. Then I would start by working on your nonviolent communication skills.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's taking an online class, reading some books, watching some YouTubes, nonviolent communication strategies are going to be your best friend for an 18-year-old because their brain is not fully developed until 25, which means you're still dealing with an immature brain, but their responsibilities and privileges of an adult. And it's this weird like mismatch that happens in this age group where you're like, I do actually know better because I am the adult with a fully formed brain and like life experience. However,
That's not going to fly though.
Right. It's not going to work. So nonviolent communication strategies help to manage the not fully matured brain and create more safety in your engagements with that kid. So a lot of nonviolent communication involves, reflecting back what you've heard and asking for clarification or correction. Asking before you dive in to a conversation, like, do you have time and space to talk about Thanksgiving? Instead of just diving into what are the plans for Thanksgiving? Gentle ways of actually managing consent and creating safety for those conversations first. And then acknowledging the reality of what you guess they might be experiencing when you share something that might be hard. So like, I know when you grew up, everything seemed like super peachy with your parents. Well, things weren't super peachy. And I would love to talk to you more about what happened or details of that so that you could see me as a whole human. And I was kind of protecting you from that for years when I didn't feel like you were ready to know. But I will still continue to protect you from that information if you're not really wanting to hear it. Instead of just like trauma dump because you're 18. Don't do that.
Yeah, that's really good advice because I think sometimes people think like, oh yeah, I can share everything now, but they might not be ready. And this idea of consent, it's also good to teach consent. That's another way of reinforcing ideas of consent, even at this age, right? We're still reinforcing consent at all the ages.
Always, yes. We want to make sure that we are allowing space for a difference in values because they are a whole adult human, and also having really clear boundaries for ourselves as the parent, saying, my value is that I'm available for you when you need me, and that I'm going to prioritize my own ambitions and happiness. And so that means if I don't get back to you right away, as long as it's not an emergency, it's not personal. So I want you to know, like, I'm not always going to be available every 2 seconds like I always was growing up, because you've moved out, you've gone to college, and now I have to reinvent myself, which prioritizes fun and enjoyment. So sometimes I have plans, boundary conversations.
Awesome. I want to go to some of the questions or things that were raised in the community. But before I do that, I think the one thing that we touched on a little bit, but I don't know if you have any additional thoughts you wanted to share in terms of what not to say to kids.
Yeah. These are some of my like soapbox situations. So buckle up. All right.
Buckle up.
Yeah. So sometimes people will say, you can ask me anything.
Yeah.
Don't say that. Don't say that. What does that do? If you say to a kid, you can ask me anything, you are transferring the load of being in charge and being the leader for that conversation to the child. A child does not need that pressure. They do not need that responsibility. That is overwhelming and scary. Instead, you take that responsibility and you say, when things come up that I think are important to share with you and teach you, I will let you know. I will keep checking in on this with you so that you feel supported. I know this is a lot to process and manage. I know this is new. I am going to keep track of how often we chat about this so that I make sure that you get enough time to have this conversation, because learning new stuff is hard. Do not say you can ask me anything. That's my soapbox. Take that weight. Be the leader for your kid. Don't push that off and put that responsibility on a child. Also, don't say, what do you want to know about?
YZ.
You're expecting a child to like process the whole picture and choose some things out. No, that's like asking them to eat an elephant. No. Instead, make a guess. I'm guessing that you would like to know about this topic first. Is that right? So let's say that your kid discovers a pregnancy test in the bathroom. Okay? They're surprised by that reality. Instead of saying, what do you want to know about that? That's too much, right? Say, I'm guessing you'd like to know if we're trying to have more kids. Isn't that right? I'm guessing you want to know why that was there, like what happened to cause that to be in the trash can. Is that right? So instead of, again, placing the entire burden on your child to like process this huge event and all their feelings and try to make sense of it, and then like hand you on a silver platter their perfect question, don't do that. It's not appropriate, even for adults often, to ask that question. Make a guess and see if that's something that they'd want to start with. And having that on-ramp to the conversation can be something that gives them momentum to continue to ask questions. Take that responsibility on yourself. Another one is, don't tell grandma about blah, 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 or don't tell the pastor about blah, 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 or don't tell your babysitter about what we're doing tonight. Like, don't tell blank is the worst thing to say to a child. Why? Because it's what abusers do. Abusers are the one who says, don't tell mom and dad about whatever, blah, blah. Like, we do not need to be talking to our kids that way ever. Instead, we want to say, what do you think could happen if we talk about this with grandma? This is practicing critical thinking. And it doesn't cause our kids to immediately want to rebel and do the thing we told them not to do. What do you think could happen if we talk about, mom, dad, and extra girlfriend going to a concert tonight? If we talk about that with the babysitter, well, maybe she doesn't want to babysit for us anymore because she's not comfortable with our relationship style. And you like her babysitting. So you can decide if you want to protect that relationship and not be fully disclosing, or you can decide to test that relationship by sharing this information and seeing if she's okay with things. Like, what do you think? What should we do? So we're going to be using language like, what do you think could happen if we tell blah, blah, blah.
Oh, I like that.
The last one is, why can't you blank? Why can't you be happy for me? Why can't you understand that this is me being an autonomous woman. Why can't you blah? Why can't you is never a good thing to say, really, to anyone, not just children. Instead, say, I noticed a consistent frustration about blah, 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 blah. Could you tell me more about this? Or I noticed your eye contact gets really weird when I talk about blah, blah, blah. Could you tell me more about this? Or I notice you exit the conversation as soon as we talk about blah, blah, blah. Could you tell me more about this? I noticed, and then you share a deniable fact. It's not about being mean or pointed. Like, there's no attachment of opinion in the statement. I noticed, undeniable fact. Could you tell me more about it? In that space, you create a conversation to get to what you're trying to get to without saying you're a failure, which is why can't you is you're a failure. We don't want to say that. We want to say that we notice something, because noticing means we care. I notice X. Could you tell me more about that?
Right. And they can also deny that too, right? I like that.
And they could correct you 100%. Yeah.
I use some of these tips to try to open up a conversation with my niece about my Instagram account, because I used to not post on my personal Instagram, my Tara Lynn Franco Instagram. Everything was on our Tara and Andre. So anything to do with the podcast, polyamory. But then I was like, I'm just going to start cross-posting. It doesn't matter. And then I remembered that she follows me on Instagram. So I was trying to figure out how to approach her an opening to allow her to share how she might feel about it. So I think I said, I'm guessing you noticed that I've been posting a lot about polyamory and non-monogamy on my Instagram. I think I said, I wonder what that might be like for you. I think I said.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
And she's like, she just was like, it's cool. Like, I think that's what she said.
It's you being you. It's fun.
She's like, it's cool. Or she just didn't say much. And then it was like, she didn't skip the stone. So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I probably said, like, but if you have questions, anytime.
Yeah. So which one of the listener questions do you think we should go to next?
I can go into it. I thought it was really interesting. The one, someone who had introduced to their son of 11 to two of their long-term partners, and now they're no longer in relationships with either person, and they were concerned that they might be doing harm to their child by these breakups, and that these people would disappear. And I know you talked about how you would talk about it, but maybe we can just quickly go over that again, or something different.
Sure. Okay, so at 11, that kid has had the opportunity to make assessments of a person and the way that they engage with that person. At 11, oh, that person's interesting. That person's fun to be around. Or that person's boring. Or that person doesn't listen to me. Or that person's kind of a jerk. Like, at 11, that kid has opinions about a person. So offering space for your kid to talk about qualities of people they enjoy can help them process the loss of those people that have left. And then you can say things like, people leave our lives, and that's the reality of just being humans. People will move, people will break up with you, people will stop being your friend. Like, that's just part of peopling. But we can look for other people based on the qualities that we enjoy. So, like, what do we want to look for? And that's a good way to make it, like, applicable to the future, but also create space for that conversation about what has happened.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well said.
That's great. The other one is about how much affection to show in front of kids, depending on the age, and whether or not you've introduced them and how you've introduced them, or at what stage of the scaffolding you are. Maybe that has an influence.
Yeah, so kids are bystanders. And in the kink world, a bystander is someone who cannot consent to what they're witnessing. They're someone who needs to be accounted for in the most conservative space. So that means we shouldn't be leaving evidence out for our kids to find. They're a bystander. We need to protect them from things they don't have the ability to consent to. We shouldn't be showing up with lots of hickeys all over the place, because that raises alarm bells in our kids' heads saying you were unsafe and your safety matters to my existence. Now I'm afraid and I don't know how to talk about it. We shouldn't be creating those feelings in our kids with our choices and our behaviors. So with that frame in mind of like, this is a bystander, an innocent bystander who cannot consent, we have to consider our behaviors. Behaviors that will raise alarm bells should not be happening in front of children that have had no baseline understanding, no scaffolding, no ability to say they don't like it. Like if there's no space for a child's opinion or voice in a family, they should see nothing and hear nothing at all. But if you're creating space in your family as a sex positive family, as an askable adult, as a safe adult, for a child's opinion and voice to be heard and valued, then there's more space for you to do more of those behaviors, because you can help process those behaviors. You can make meaning of those behaviors. Because what's going to happen? Our kid is going to see something, hear something, bump into something, and then if there's no space for them to process that at home, they're going to share that little tidbit with all the people that they can talk to about it, because it's titillating, it's exciting, it's confusing, it's taboo. And that's going to bring to you all the problems of all the people hearing this information that shouldn't have heard that information, because you were not creating safety for them to share it with you. So we want to interrupt that cycle by allowing kids to make meaning of age-appropriate information where their voice, opinions, and feelings have value. So that means having clear boundaries that says, I'm not going to tell you about things that are going to potentially cause you harm. And that would be like my play case in my closet. My kids know that it's there. They know that I'm not going to unlock it. And they know that I'm not going to tell them what's in it. And so they know that I have secrets. Why? I have created meaning for why. So they don't feel like they're being lied to. The why is I'm keeping them safe by not giving them information that could cause other people to make bad choices. So we have to create the meaning and give them safety and value their voices before we do anything that could raise red flags.
Right. I think that's a really good point. And so in families where the kids are differing ages, and maybe for whatever reason, you haven't shared the same level of information, things like, once you've passed that year mark and you're having partners over, showing affection, you may have to go to the lowest age in terms of what you show, as much as you want to spend time together. So even mommy and daddy sitting with their other partners watching football, might be a weird thing if you haven't had that conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And being willing to say, people are allowed to show affection in different ways. If we're in our home, we can be more affectionate. If we're out in public, we need to be more conservative. That's a rule that makes sense to kids, because you're not cuddling and wrestling when you're out in public, but you are cuddling and wrestling when you're at home. So you can explain some of that code switching, and then it makes sense to kids.
Okay. Even if you haven't had the conversation with them, the younger one, perhaps about the specifics about your relationships and who these people are and that sort of thing.
I think you can create those conversations about rules being different at home versus out in public, and that can make sense to a kid. I think you could also say, some people believe that friends shouldn't cuddle, shouldn't kiss. Well, we disagree in this family. We believe that friends who love each other should cuddle and kiss. And that's the way that we've decided we're going to show affection. And you can read the children's book about the Little Mermaid that asks for a fin bump and a high five and a different ways of touching other sea creatures, and make that analogy of like, well, this sea creature did not want to be touched a certain way, and this sea creature did want to be touched a certain way, and my friends and I have talked about how we want to be touched. And so when we're at home and it's a safe space, sometimes we touch in different ways. So we can link that book in the show notes. It's fantastic, and it's a good way to teach consent. It's about consent.
Awesome. Oh, I love that. And I know you had some great suggestions before, so we'll make sure we add them to the show notes. I feel like we can talk about this forever, but before we go, We want to make sure people can get in touch with you. So tell us, where's the best place for people to get in touch with you?
I have a website, MsAshleyRobertson.com, and there's a contact me button on there like 17 times. So MsAshleyRobertson.com. I do all sorts of work, whether it's non-traditional relationship coaching or whether it's potty training with respect and early consent practices, like all sorts of things. So you can find me on my website.
And we will link that in the show notes as well. This was fantastic. Thank you very much for being our special guest again.
And once again, at MsAshleyRobertson.com, people can find you there and offering so much resource and so well said. And I loved also all of the imagery that you bring with it.
Yay. I'm an analogy person. I love them.
They speak to me, and I can see how effective they would be really be able to visualize these things. So that's awesome.
And one of our other upcoming episodes we're going to do for sure as well is we're going to be talking about, because talking to kids is hard, but also talking to friends and family and that sort of thing about being non-monogamous is something that comes up a lot for our people too. So we will be recording an episode on that as well. And so thanks everyone and for listening to the podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.
If you want to have relationships that are secure, sexy, and satisfying, take advantage of our Black Friday deal on our Poly Newbies digital course. Only $27 until December 2nd, 2024. Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast with TNA. Don't forget to subscribe and give us some love on your favorite podcasting platform. You can check out the show notes for any of the links to the courses or information we talked about today. Thanks, and have a fantastic and sexy day.